I wrote a sacred service in 1960, Shir la Rev Shabbat, on the eve of the Sabbath eve. And Cantor David Putterman had met me one evening, Shakespeare in the Park, where I was commissioned, although Joseph Papp didn't really have any money to commission me, but he allowed me, thank heavens, with no funds, to write the music for the very first Shakespeare in the Park there ever was, in the summer of 1957, with Jerry Stiller and Ann Muir, and later on George C. Scott and all these great actors. It was really exciting. And the following summer, we did Twelfth Night, which I eventually made into an opera with Joseph Papp, a two-act opera. But of course, at that time, I was writing incidental music. And Cantor Putterman came with his son, Zev Putterman, because Zev knew me because of Zev Putterman, the Cantor's son. Zev was a friend of Lenny Bruce, and I knew Lenny Bruce from my involvement as a jazz musician. I was playing with Oscar Pettiford's band, and with Charles Mingus and Dizzy Gillespie, and I had met Lenny Bruce and met Zev Putterman through that circle of friends. So Zev brought his father, Cantor David J. Putterman, to the Shakespeare in the Park to meet me. And apparently Cantor Putterman liked my music, and he said, David, he said, you're a promising composer. Someday, I want you to write a piece for our synagogue. And I said, well, I would be thrilled. So sure enough, about a year later, he asked me if I would write a Friday night service. And I spent probably nearly 200 hours with him. Because of my dad's side being Sephardic, my transliteration for the singers, who were mostly English-speaking singers and had to read a transliteration, would never have been accurate in the Ashkenazic pronunciation. And Cantor Putterman, in addition to being such a wonderful, expressive singer and knowing the traditional singing, when he sung the counting of the Omar and those traditional things, it was just phenomenal. And while he said, I'm not really schooled in music the way Jan Pierce and some of the great opera singers are, he said, I have the neshama, I have the soul. And he said, I can show you the pronunciation, the style, and the transliteration, and we're going to go over every single syllable so that when it's done in the future, it will be accurate and set well. And he said, now imagine if Handel's Messiah had had some help when he was writing some of the English, for the Lord God omnipotent, instead of omnipotent, because Handel, not knowing English that well, wrote one of the greatest pieces of all time, in spite of the fact that it wasn't really set as well as it would have been if he'd either written it in German or had someone like Cantor Putterman come and say, look, you're a genius, but that ain't the way it's pronounced. So Cantor Putterman went over painstakingly every single syllable of every single prayer that we did over and over again, so that when I finally wrote the piece, it actually was understandable to the congregations, and secondly, was doing honor to those magnificent prayers. And for that, he's always in my heart with gratitude, because otherwise I would have had colossal mistakes that I wouldn't have known about.
This is an entire service?
Yes.
Just written that one service?
Yes, the only part that I didn't do, I did a year later, when a cantor, Nathaniel Springer, I believe his name was, in the temple in Newark, said the only part you left out of your service was the Kaddish. And if I'm not mistaken, Cantor Putterman, I think, didn't want a Kaddish for this particular service. So I added that to the sacred service.
Did you use any traditional material for that? Did you attempt to use any?
I tried just to let the music of the prayers, the music of the words, and the spirit dictate what to write. And I've written so many pieces since then that do use traditional materials from time to time. I'm happy that I did it that way, because it now has something that I'm not sure I could do again. It was inspired at that moment by everything that I'd felt that I'd never had a chance to write down before. It was all the feelings that I had up until that point in my life at the age of 29. And when I was writing, I kept thinking of my father and my father's father, and the people way, way back, and everyone's fathers and mothers, and all those feelings that we have when you get together in a synagogue or any kind of group where a lot of Jewish people are together. And it's almost the same feeling you have when you're on an American Indian reservation, and suddenly, without speaking, you feel this tremendously strong contact of like a gigantic family feeling. And that's not any kind of fake spiritualism or merchandisable mysticism. I think it's a concrete fact. And I'm positive that that feeling is what has kept us able to survive all of the catastrophes, and what keeps all people able to survive. The spiritual, cultural, musical, artistic, human feeling that is an expression of an extended family and inherited history. What the great doctor and founder of psychiatry, Carl Jung, called the collective unconscious. I always felt he was the one, rather than Sigmund Freud or any of the others, that really had a handle on what it was about, because he acknowledged that mystical part that you couldn't nail down or put in a bottle or put under glass, but that was there, that soul, that neshama.
This service was done at one of the annual occasions at Park Avenue.
Yes.
So that was in what year?
It was done in 1960, and it was conducted by Maurice Perez, a wonderful conductor, whose father was a member of the Iraqi Jewish community and had come over from Baghdad and met his wife in New York, who was Ashkenazic, and had wonderful children, including their son Maurice, who later became Leonard Bernstein's assistant conductor, directed the Kansas City Symphony. A marvelous musician, also had a great grasp of Hebrew. And he said when we were at the rehearsal, he said, "This is the most exciting thing since my bar mitzvah." And he got all of the singers, tremendously talented choral singers who did not read Hebrew, and most of whom weren't Jewish, who were extraordinarily good singers, and rehearsed with them and got a magnificent performance.